All right, well, we might kick off. There is still some people coming online and a few more to come on, but good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us on this, what is the 8th webinar that we've put together since the COVID crisis came in, and a bit of a different format tonight. We're doing it newsreader style, obviously social distancing. We are actually further away than we look. We're in the coronavirus hotspot here in Melbourne, so we're all socially distancing and making sure that we're doing the right thing to flatten the curve. Just by way of introductions, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Stuart Charity. I'm the CEO of the AAAA, and I'll be making some opening comments and then doing the moderator tonight, or moderating job tonight. I'm also joined by Director of Government Relations and Advocacy, Leslie Yates, and she'll be talking about the vehicle standards side of things, and the Managing Director of the Auto Innovation Centre, Luke Truskinger, will talk about vehicle technology. So the topic is vehicle technology, government regulation, and new aftermarket product development. And we've merged the topics of regulation and vehicle technology together tonight, because the fact is that they're inextricably linked. One affects the other, and so on. So, and just to set the scene, the vehicle standards and regulation framework in Australia is very, very complex. And it's complex for a few reasons. One reason is that every state and territory in Australia has full autonomy over their vehicle standards, and they can change those standards, so essentially change the rules without any consultation with any stakeholders. Simply by putting out a vehicle standards bulletin, they change the rules. And increasingly we're seeing, and more recently we're seeing them also putting out either information bulletins or clarifications to their signatory engineers and changing the rules that way. So we have a sort of constant battle to try and keep on top of what the regulators are doing. Add to that, you've got the overlay of the federal government. That they administer, obviously, the new car vehicle standards through the ADRs, but they also interact with our industry through the second stage manufacturer scheme, and they're also responsible for introducing global technical regulations into ADRs, which can have an effect on our industry. Add to that there's a very constant turnover of personnel within all the state and territory vehicle standards departments, and what you find is it's a highly volatile situation, and at any point in time we find out either through industry or directly that some public servant in some states just had a bright thought and decided to change the rules. So more often than not, where we have to basically drop everything and react. So we're on that reactive footing. Now, the positive out of that is that I think, and I've been with this association for 14 years, and we are probably one of the most effective organisations at actually being able to respond to these to changes in regulation. We are able to act decisively, and we've had a major impact, and we've had ministers tell us that there is no way that they're going to back down on something, and within 2 days, that it's unprecedented. They told me, a federal minister told me that around bull bars, and 2 days later she withdrew the whole process, or stopped the whole process. So we have had a huge impact. And in fact, if you look back, and as I said, I've been here for a long time, and everything from the GTR 09, which is a bull bar standard that was brought in, developed in Europe, a frontal protection standard, basically would have made it impossible to design and fit a fit-for-purpose bull bar. We had VSI 50 in New South Wales, which basically would have decimated the suspension industry. You wouldn't have been able to raise or lower a vehicle without having that vehicle individually certified by a signatory engineer, and we're talking 1 millimetre up or down. We had IM240 in Western Australia, where they tried to bring in that testing for what they called significantly modified vehicles, but that basically encompassed everything from exhaust replacements to minor vehicle modifications, and would have shut down the whole performance modification industry in that state. And my personal favourite was the 2018 Operation Lift in Queensland, where the bureaucrats there decided that it would be a good idea to retrospectively introduce a requirement to have a full sign with dwell ESC test for any ESC equipped vehicle that had its suspension modified. And they did it when we were in the middle of a negotiation with them. Had the TV crews out, it's on Channel 7, 9 News, basically putting cars on trucks and on tow trucks and taking them off the road. That regulation, if it had been allowed to stand, would have retrospectively made tens of thousands of Queensland motor vehicles unroadworthy. So these are the sorts of things that we have to confront from time to time. As I said, we're very effective at doing it, and we're effective at doing it for two key reasons. One is I think we've got the best government relations manager in the business. She's amazing, and I'm glad she's on our side and not theirs. But the other is that we've got you as members in our industry, and every time we've called on you to mobilise both your industry and your customers, you've done so. And you know, we've had an amazing response. And as a united industry, we are a very, very powerful force. You know, that Operation Lift, or we call it Operation Gift now, because it was a gift that keeps on giving. We had over 1 million hits on our Facebook page over a 2-week period, and that, through sheer weight of numbers, forced the minister to backtrack on his ironclad commitment that he was going to press ahead with it. Within a week, he'd remove that regulation as well. But having said that, that reactive footing and you know, that adversarial sort of thing that we have to do with state and territory governments from time to time is not a sustainable way to run an industry and sustain an industry in the long term. We'll do it if we have to, but you can only go to that well so many times. And I think we need to be honest with ourselves. The regulators do have some valid concerns here. We know that vehicle technology is moving ahead at breakneck speed. We've got a whole lot of you know, active and passive safety systems on vehicles, ADAS systems, ESC, so on. And we can't, as an industry, keep doing what we've always done in terms of the product development, testing and validation process. And the bar is being lifted, and it's being lifted quite quickly. And the simple fact is, and anyone that's involved in vehicle modification knows that if you raise the height of the vehicle, if you put a bull bar on the front of the vehicle, if you change the vehicle dynamics, you cannot, without doing the proper testing and validation, you can't honestly say that it definitely won't have any impact on those vehicle systems. So there is an increasing burden on us as an industry to make sure that we go through that appropriate testing and validation process, and that's where we believe the Auto Innovation Centre is going to play a key role, because what that centre is doing is helping to increase the sophistication of the product development process across the industry and reduce the time and cost of that testing and validation process. So that's probably a good introduction. Obviously, Luke and Leslie will cover these issues in more detail, but just from a housekeeping point of view, basically those of you that have been on these webinars before will probably know the drill, but what we'll do is we'll have about 25 to 30 minutes of combined presentations between Luke and Leslie, and then we throw the webinar open to you, and we welcome questions from you. Because there are so many people on the webinar, we can't enable microphones of attendees, but when I call for Q&As at the end, if you click on the Q&A button and type in your question, and then we'll throw those to the panel and get to as many of them as we can tonight. I'll also say that both Leslie and Luke's presentations will be shared following this webinar, so you don't need to take copious notes. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to Luke Truskinger, the CEO or Managing Director of the Auto Innovation Centre. Luke.
Thanks, Stuart. Good evening, everybody. This is my first webinar presentation, so I'm just going to assume that everybody's laughing at every joke that I make and paying close attention to what I'm saying and not cooking dinner. So thank you for joining. I'm going to basically run through a little bit about new vehicle technology and how it affects current and future design and testing of the products in the aftermarket. So I'll just start by having just a little bit of a divide, I guess, between what the or explanation on what the AAAA and what the AIC's function are. So I think everybody here obviously knows the AAAA are. They're the voice for the industry. They represent manufacturers, distributors, wholesalers, importers, retailers, and repairers. Really strong in the networking advocacy side of things. Run expos, networking events, you name it. The AIC, however, is a newly established wholly owned subsidiary of the AAAA, is its own independent company, but strongly focused on the technical and physical side. So we're targeting assisting companies who are developing products, so more that engineering side as opposed to I guess the sales side or the side that gets significantly impacted by I guess the advocacy side of things. However, I will touch on the amazing synergy between the government advocacy side and the AIC, because the real big role that we're filling here is working with the government relations team to assist when there is a legislation change or a potential change. So have a quick look at now versus then. I find it's always good to have a look at where we are now versus where we've been and things that we've learned. So this is, everyone knows this car, Ford Ranger, probably one of the most accessorised vehicles in Australia on the road right now. Huge suite of aftermarket products available. And I thought I'd just list the technical features that, technology that comes on this vehicle. I obviously was reasonably aware of a lot of this sort of stuff, but until you log in and actually just do a sanity check and log onto the website and the brochures to have a look at what it's got, it really has a huge amount of technology in the vehicle. And a lot of those things are potentially affected by the accessories that you see fitted to the vehicle. So this vehicle's got a frontal protection system, a winch, bigger wheels and tyres, raised suspension, a snorkel, roof rack, potentially a dual battery system, and a host of other modifications. And we have to the industry has to make sure that those products don't negatively affect the function of the technology that you see on the screen there. And Stuart made a really good point just then that you have to do the right testing. You have to be sure that this is not going to have a detrimental effect on it. But the fact of the matter is that anything you do will have an effect. And that's an interesting concept, because depending, if you're completely black and white, if you raise the weight of the vehicle and you change it, you are going to change the dynamic performance of the vehicle. But importantly, all of these systems have an operating window. They have a scope and they have acceptable functional range. And that's probably one of the biggest things that the AIC is focusing on supporting is that range and making sure we still fall in that range. And it's not just black and white. It's not just it was designed that way and that's how it's going to be. For instance, a radar system comes on this vehicle, and that radar looks at vehicles in front and potentially has to be relocated when a frontal protection system is fitted to the vehicle. But if you look at the factory vehicle, it's a pickup. It has a huge range of pitch variations just in its standard operating guise. So for standard use, it has to have that tolerance. So we're really focused on trying to make sure we understand the acceptable window in there. So this is what we're looking at now. This is a 19 model year or 20 model year vehicle. And these are the sort of features that are on it. And I want to take a quick look back at kind of where we've come from and what it would have looked like 30 years ago. Well, 30, almost 40 years ago. This would be an example of a very popular modified vehicle back in the early to mid 80s. Wonderful car, it's chosen intentionally by me. You're probably looking at modified wheels, rubber, potentially engine modifications, suspension changes. And back then, I hazard a guess that there was probably no certification required or being done on those products before it got fitted to a vehicle. But if we have a look at the technology that it had to comply with, it's pretty much the list of features, apart from maybe electric ignition, that came on that vehicle in terms of technology comparable to what's on the Ford Ranger. So we have come a long way. Things have changed a lot. That car didn't have ABS or airbags as well. So the things that, what are the impacts? So suspension systems can impact on the stability control and brake performance, which we all know that's a pretty well documented area that gets tested regularly. Frontal protection systems are coming up against a host of sensors in terms of radars, parking sensors, ultrasonic parking sensors. Cooling packs are getting increasingly sophisticated and reliant on airflow. There's cameras and all sorts of features at the front there that never designed to work with metal components. Tow bars and rear bars, there's radars in the back there now. You've got LED lights, which is making it difficult, and again, the parking sensors. And then we've got all the electronics, the onboard electronics, which is really getting complicated, a lot harder to see, a lot harder to touch. I think it's important to look at whether, again, where we've come from. So back in the early 2000s, leaded fuels got banned, and there was a huge concern that the performance industry was going to have a huge impact and really be detrimentally affected by this, because back in the early 2000s, I mean, at the moment we're really focused on four-wheel drives and SUVs, but back then it was performance cars, and power just went through the roof. Like it was a non-event. I'm not saying it's not a non-event, but I'm saying we always find a way around it. A very ingenious group of people in this industry. But there will be some casualties along the way. I mean, LPG conversions and ethanol components, they might, make way for the EV movement. What the OEMs do and how they, how they develop technology and how they're implementing it. Traction control really changed the focus on the requirement for diff locks and the way that, more OEM vehicles coming out, turbochargers, for instance, really reduce the reliance on things like camshafts and internal engine modifications. It's just a much different way to modify vehicles now. And I love polycarbonate headlamps. Really, headlight covers are redundant since glass headlights went out, but there's still a market for them. They still get sold. So I guess want to know what makes it so difficult is that I don't want to say it's the OEMs, because it's actually tier one suppliers. The OEMs are specialists and they're hyper-focused in their field of technology, and they develop new technology continually, and then they sell it to the OEMs. And this gets deployed and issued out into vehicles before there's any legislation. But we can't keep up with all of them. I mean, they're highly, highly focused and highly technological companies that do this. And so we end up having a big window of time where there is minimal documentation or supporting evidence on what we should do with this technology and how we should test it, and more importantly, what's acceptable. I mean, when it's a black box, we don't know if we're affecting it negatively or where it's designed to work. So as more and more technology is pushed into vehicles, it's becoming a bit more prevalent that we have to make sure that there are guidelines and they don't take too long to be implemented. So how do we test it? So a lot of the times there can be no legislation, which is difficult. If there's legislation, which means there's compliance, we test the legislation. That's pretty straightforward. Often there'll be state-by-state requirements that might call for some or all of a regulation for a test, but it does take time to develop. For instance, in ADR 3102, it was first mandated the required performance of an ESC system of vehicles, a very definitive black and white, this is how it must perform. But this was for new vehicle models after 2011 and all vehicles from the end of 2013. So end of 2013, we had ESC in vehicles on the road in the mid-90s, and it was widespread in the early 2000s. So you're talking over a decade where there was no way to know whether ESC was being affected. And then it's not till it really comes to a head and we say, right, well, somebody says it must be checked because of whatever reason has taken place, and then we have a legislation to test to. But even though we can test to it now, it's still north of $300,000 of equipment to do the testing. So that's something also to keep in mind. So this is a list of features that are covered by legislation. So there is test procedures for this. So there's test procedures for tow bars, for electronic stability control, the brakes and the ABS, and the lighting. Here's a list of the features that aren't covered by a direct legislative test procedure. So tire pressure monitoring system, cameras in the vehicle, ultrasonic parking sensors, adaptive cruise, and AEB, thermal performance of the powertrain, lane keep, pedestrian avoidance, hill hold, launch assist, and towing performance. And some of those are really relevant to the industry right now in terms of towing performance and thermal capability, as well as AEB. You know, there's a lot of grey areas there. So we need to know the difference between what's not acceptable and what has had an acceptable performance but has affected its function on the vehicle. So in summary, basically, the thing to keep in mind is that no driver assistance system is perfect. And you'll see that by checking every manual that the vehicle comes with. But we need to know what is acceptable. Product design is getting more sophisticated, and we're here to try and support that. We really want to make sure we help people on the road about, you know, how is product development done and how do you validate those products. Testing is getting more niche. I guess a lot of products are being driven a lot more towards having a type approval. You have to have kind of like a kit that you get tested once because the cost is so high. You need to amortize it out across the volumes. And importantly, the thing to take solace in is that it is doable. The systems are getting smarter. You can't. The better the systems get, the less you can fool them. You can't really trick them a lot. They're not as, I guess, open loop as they used to be. So there is a whole lot of scope that we can do to justify this. And what we're doing about it, I touched on this at the very start, there's an amazing synergy between the government relations team and the AIC in terms of speaking to the state and federal regulators. We walk into a room and I feel like we're a perfect partnership. So Leslie does, you know, all the politics. She does all, I guess, the structure of it. But then when they start throwing technical questions out, that comes to me, and being an independent facility in the AIC, we get a whole lot of support there, and they know that we've got the collective capability of the entire industry sitting behind us, and we're speaking on behalf and the best interests of the industry. And while it can be difficult, it can be really hard, and Stuart spoke about some issues in the past where it's just mind-bogglingly bad, and you know there's clarifications that come out that change the law and that they effectively change everything the industry is doing. They really do listen to us, and it's actually quite a pleasure to walk in and talk to these people. And I have to tell you that particularly the state regulators, almost every single one I've spoken to is a diehard car enthusiast. So they do want a solution. It's great to sit down and talk to them. They still put their work hat on, but I'm massively confident that when we do have issues, that we can make sure that we maintain the commercial viability of the industry in the product development space by working together with the government relations team and to getting the right answers on the table for everybody. So that's me. I will hand over to Leslie now, and yeah, I'll chat to you after, I guess.
Awesome. Thank you, Luke. That was fantastic. This gives me a really good opportunity to talk about what's going on in terms of government regulation, and I'll try not to do much overlap with what Luke talked about, but what a great scene setting. And as Stuart said, as the vehicles get more sophisticated, I know that product development becomes more sophisticated and more complex in your industry, but it also becomes more complex in ours because the arguments need to be as sophisticated as the technology is becoming, and the challenge for us becomes more and more. So just want to walk you through some of the things that are currently going on in our world.
Hit the arrow on the bottom left. Go on the bottom left.
Good technology. Here we go.
Other right. Other right.
The other right. Just to give you a sense of, and many of you will be aware of this because I had a bit of a peek at the registrations, and I know the calibre of people on this call. So I know that many of you have got intimate knowledge of some of the issues that we've been responding to on a regular basis, but this is an average 12 to 18 month period. And some of them are serious, some of them are just reconfirmations of standards, but this just gives you a sense of what it is that governments are looking at. We're seeing organisations like Standards Australia getting very interested in the electric vehicle space. So that battery standards is a brand new Standards Australia committee. So is aftermarket seatbelts and child restraints. But state governments at the moment are absolutely embedded in lift, in GVM, GCM, a little bit of brake towing capacity, and we've started to have some power to weight conversations, Luke. So we're very much having a year dominated by, apart from global pandemics, we're having a year dominated by vehicle mass. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So, I mean, you all know why this scenario is complicated, and Stuart touched upon it as well, that we've got, I put that harmony in inverted commas, because of course there is no state federal harmony. But I think one of the things that is really difficult to get your head around in our industry is that the National Code of Practice, so the NCOP BSB 14, is used to both justify national compliance and justify the lack thereof. So from time to time, we'll be sitting in front of a state government saying, why are you doing this? And they'll say, oh, because we want to. And we'll say, it's not consistent with other states, or it's not consistent with VSB 14. And they'll say, well, we're a sovereign nation. We choose to pick up whatever we choose to pick up. And of course, VSB 14 is open to interpretation. So what the New South Wales government recently did was an interpretation or a clarification of VSB 14. So whilst it may look like on paper, if you were from another planet, you might arrive and go, oh, this looks like a structure that brings in harmony. Look, you've got a national structure that looks after pre-registration, the states look after post-registration, we've got that beautiful certification board working party where all the states meet, and there is peace in our lifetime. But of course there is not. And even when we get down to the state government, so the states don't agree with the national government from time to time. They're certainly not agreeing with them at the moment on SSM. But the states sometimes don't even agree with each other. And also there are conflicts within the state government. So there can be a difference between the policy people and the compliance people. So the compliance people, the ones that we're trying to get our modifications through, or our customers are, to get them certified, they're not supposed to set policy. They're supposed to administer policy. It's up to the policy group to do that. And that's where we interact with vehicle standards, with the policy group, with the regulatory group, not the tick and flick people. But of course, you know better than most, vehicle compliance are clarifying and interpreting. So what can happen to us from time to time is the compliance people kind of get the upper hand. That's what's happening in New South Wales at the moment. We're having vehicle standards that is dominated by the Compliance Bureau, and the policy people are quieter than they have been. And of course, the certifiers have an important role to play here, because what state governments will say to you is, we actually don't approve vehicle modifications. We approve that the certifiers have done their job. Interesting dichotomy. And of course, it gets even more complicated by the land that we live in. So when we're in front of regulators, these are the issues that we deal with. And I know we've talked about these because you've talked to me and said, you know, why are we trying to prove that we're safe? They haven't proved that we're unsafe. Notice 17, the New South Wales government's clarification of axle mass increases is an interesting one, because what the industry is saying through us to the New South Wales government is, show us evidence of where there's been a failure. Where's your failures? None, by the way. I don't have any. Anecdotally, of course, there are some, but I haven't got any data. I mean, we've really pushed against this, Stuart, a long time, haven't we? Why are we proving a negative? We've really rallied against this. But the reality is, the weight of evidence is always going to be ours. It is. And we've got to stop going, you prove to us what we're doing is unsafe, because we're not winning that argument. And this brings me down to point 4, which is they don't actually have a problem. So what they could do is say, no modifications. Why do I want to? I don't want a modification. So we've got to, the weight of evidence is always going to be ours, to provide a bank of evidence that we are doing our due diligence, that we wouldn't risk our reputation, we certainly wouldn't risk our consumers' safety, the driver's safety, and we wouldn't be in business very long if we were developing products and modifying vehicles in a way that was unsafe. But that's not enough. We've got to have a weight of evidence, and we've got to be able to prove that. Frequently we say to governments, look, we give it a go, guys, and I know you say this to me, I'm an employer, we make an economic contribution. Many of you are developing and manufacturing in Australia, but the sad reality, I feel like I'm telling you there's no Santa Claus here, is that the government departments responsible for regulating vehicle modifications don't care about employment and economic contribution. That's a different department. Now, we'll play that card because we'll bring the industry minister into play when we need to, but the public servants that we're sitting in front of aren't responsible for economic conditions. They're responsible for road safety. And if I've heard, I make no apologies for road safety being my #1 priority once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Of course, we always suffer from point 3, which is that vehicles are perfect. Cue a couple of New South Wales regulators, I won't name by name, but the New South Wales people on the line know who I'm talking about, and that is that the vehicle is perfect and it undergoes millions of dollars worth of ADR testing or international testing, and why are you tinkering with it? Now, I'm surprised that this argument came up, in fact, last week, because Stuart, I thought we'd overcome this now that we don't manufacture vehicles in Australia, mass vehicles in Australia, because we've always argued that a global platform vehicle is going to need to be modified. But you know what, I think we need to get further down the line of proving to government departments that there are a number of reasons why you'd modify a vehicle. I mean, you actually modify it for accessibility purposes, you modify it for rough conditions, you modify it for trade and business, and you modify it for it to be fit for purpose. Maybe we need to start producing some of those numbers or even illustrations, because I cannot believe that last week I heard this argument all over again. I heard the simplest way for you people to get your modifications are approved is to ask permission from the OEM. And if they like your products, we'll approve them. I'm sure that Toyota and Ford are going to be signing off on our products every day now.
I know their microphones are on mute, but I can hear them all laughing.
I think a pig just flew there.
And finally, they are risk averse, obviously, because that's the business that they're in, they're public servants. And in effect, who's got a problem here? We're the ones with a problem. If they've already brought down a notice, which isn't good for us, it's our problem, not theirs. And we're the ones that have to start building a constructive argument. A simple answer for them and an easy life for them is there are no vehicle modifications. Despite the fact, as Luke says, what's really a conundrum is that many of them love cars and have heavily modified their own vehicles. And I think one of the benefits of the AIC is we've been able to play into that a fair bit. We've discovered a lot of interesting modifications amongst the vehicle regulators by bringing them into the AIC. So, Stuart touched on this. There are 2 ways that we find out that there has been a change in vehicle regulations, or there is about to be. And the first one is our preferred, of course, which is there's a consultative approach. And we do sit on a number of vehicle standards committees. We're on Standards Australia committees, and we are, with some state governments, brought in early for a genuinely open conversation. A good example of that would have been Western Australia. Didn't do so well on bull bars in the first phase, but in the second phase of seeing that things are much better when they sit down with us and have a constructive conversation, things went quite well. And they've reached out to us on a couple of other product areas and really are having an open, honest conversation with us about some of the issues they have and some of the concerns they have on things like power to weight. So it's a good blank page conversation. What we do when we get those consultative ones is we get a chance to engage with members that have got expertise in the field. We could put together a focus groups. We're often reaching out to you saying, you know, can you share some background on these issues? We do have previous policy positions, which is, of course, we're very much in favour of type approval. We want to test once and produce more. We'll always go for that. We're always looking at what we call non-structural repetitive modifications that require less testing. we're always looking for fit for purpose. So don't do this much testing for this much evidence required. And because we're very international links, we are able to reach out and look at what others are doing. And as soon as we have an emissions issue, we quickly go and have a look at what California is doing, because we find out that state regulators are trying to beat what is best in class, best in the world. So the second way that we get vehicle products to us is reactive. It's our least preferred because that's, as Stuart said, the drop everything. And normally it's probably one of you on this call that gives us a ring or sends us an email to say, have you heard about this? That is very sad. And sadly, I often say to regulators, there's the easy way and there's the hard way, and this is the hard way, because now we've actually got to go out to the media, we've got to open our little black books and start making some phone calls to politicians. That's when we mobilise membership, some of your mailing lists. We'd encourage people to suddenly get onto the Google, who is my MP, and start having a conversation with local members of parliament. That's how you get 1 million hits in 2 weeks. So it's not something we actually like doing, but it's something we are geared up to do more and more, and something we will do when we discover that a state government department normally has unilaterally, literally changed our world overnight. I just want to talk about a couple of the issues that are current at the moment. And this is news to no one, I should imagine, that we're having a great deal of conversation about GVM upgrades, particularly in New South Wales, which is ironic given how much work has been done, particularly with Nigel Bishop and TMR in Queensland. So we thought we'd developed a good framework for that, but lo and behold, across the border, not that we'd know, we're not allowed it over the border, but across the border, New South Wales decides overnight through a clarification that we're not allowed to go beyond the manufacturer's specified axle mass weight rating. Very concerning indeed, and not an argument that we're having with any other state government. The gross combination mass is an interesting conversation because after a clarification or a change, depending on which side of the issue you live on, we formed a AAA technical working group. It's really an interesting development for us to start building up what might look like a protocol, and that was developed specifically for government dialogue. So it wasn't this is what we think is the final answer. It was, this is what we think is a good basis to start a conversation. In fact, we treated them the way we would like to be treated. This is what we think is a constructive answer to a problem that you have, and frankly, a problem that we may have as an industry if what we're doing is not seen by regulators to be responsible. We are a responsible industry, and we are able to document that and have a sensible, grown-up conversation with you. Here's the current issues. So today's to-do list, just an update for you on axle mass. We had a meeting of that working party that New South Wales put together on Notice 17. That was specifically so that the government could explain that it's all a clarification. It's not, it's a mashup of 14.6 and Circular 046, my terminology, mashup. But we've got to the point where they are openly saying, all right, you tell us what the answer is. So we're up for that challenge, and we're coming back to people to formulate our own plan. Victoria's got a sudden interest in using IM240 testing for a range of modifications that we don't think require IM240, but I think we're in a genuine open conversation there. That's a polite conversation.
Tell them to Google Western Australia IM240.
Yeah. Yeah, I do try to do that, Stuart. I do think, did you check to Western Australia? I mean, what happens when there's only one test facility? What happens to an industry? It's not healthy. Interesting. Look, I think this is an interesting issue for us, is that state governments move, as you said, Stuart, depending on the personnel as well. So, you know, after years of pretty good relations, New South Wales has gone crazy. Rogue, that's the word. Victoria's doing a few more things than they have in the past, but it's very constructive, and we're having a good dialogue with them. We've never had a better relationship with Western Australia, and I don't think we've ever had a better relationship with TMR in Queensland. I think it is handy we do have a membership development manager who speaks Queensland. So that's probably why I've got a good result there. I think one of the issues on our list today is we're really worried about policy being developed via certified bulletins. So the way that you change a reg now is you put out a sneaky bulletin to the certifiers. We've really got to get closer to our certifiers because we've got a shared problem here. They don't agree with a number of these bulletins, but in some states they're not in a good position to be objecting. So I think we need to be talking closely with them, and they are the ones feeding us a lot of information at the moment. So it's probably room for us to get closer. I just think in terms of where we go in the future, a sustainable industry means that we do have to get closer and closer to what we think is the solution. So, I mean, when we finally get a government department to the point where they go, okay, we're stuffed up, they're going to say, what do you think the answer is? And we need to be ready for that more and more than we have in the past. I think it is useful, I'm just picking up on Luke's presentation about new aftermarket products, to ask the question as a developer of products, what would I be worried about if I was a regulator? If I was regulating vehicles on Victorian, South Australian, Queensland roads, what would worry me about this component? And not as a, oh my God, I shouldn't do it, but more, how would I answer that worry? And that's about what test regime. What would make, if a regulator said, explain to me how this interacts with these components, your ability to be ahead of them and say, I comply with this standard, or internationally, this is the test and I'm using it. The more we're able to do that, the more we can head off things like Notice 17 or Operation Gift. Look, we are building a better relationship with the regulators, predominantly through the AIC. We are getting closer and closer. I mean, they are human, I'm told. So I think that augurs well for our future as well, just building that engineer-to-engineer conversation before it becomes a combative adversarial relationship. I think that that's going well. We're always going to be at the mercy of changes in personnel, a coroner's inquiry, a different minister. The thing that we can control, I think, is the cohesiveness of our industry and our ability to come to the front line when we need to. It's probably what I think is the most important in terms of our sustainability. But we'll work on all of these other elements to safeguard ourselves against some rogue New South Wales regulator who thinks Notice 17 is just a clarification. I think I'm done, Stuart.
All right.
That's okay.
Close enough.
Okay. So thanks very much, Luke and Leslie, for those presentations. We now move into the part of this session where you control. So we've got the experts in the room. So we'd welcome your questions. Just a reminder again to click on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. If you move your cursor around, you'll see that, and type in some questions, and we'll direct it to the relevant person on the panel. So we'll start off, first question is a good one. Will autonomous vehicles mean the end of vehicle accessorising? Luke?
Is that for Leslie? Oh, no. Look, I honestly don't think so. Vehicle autonomy is very much a progressive move. I guess the first step's probably what we saw in adaptive cruise control, which we've seen about 10 years ago now, and that's really one of the first, I guess, instances where the vehicle's taking control. It's a very small step, but it's all progressive that gets us to the point where there's autonomy. We're going to, we know it's possible. It's been done. And at some point there will be autonomous vehicles or just fully autonomous vehicles driving around. But that doesn't, if you think about why we modify our vehicles, they're modified to do something that they weren't originally designed to do. So take more weight, to be more fit for purpose for trade, to go more places, to go faster on a racetrack, to, a number of different reasons, disability access, it could be anything. And there is always going to be a need to do that. And a lot of vehicles these days, I guess, would be your four-wheel drives and SUVs, and they get modified to go camping and go away. And I don't, from what I see driving around the suburbs of Melbourne, I don't think people do those modifications for the pleasure of commuting to work. So, where the autonomy will do your mundane driving, there's always going to be need to modify vehicles. And no doubt we'll see different modifications that'll have to come up as a result. I mean, who knows what we'll be doing when we're not driving our car. I don't know, making coffee, something inside the vehicle, who knows. But there will definitely be different modifications. And I think a lot of the majority of the current ones, the reasons they're being done aren't going to change, regardless of whether the vehicle's autonomous.
Thanks, Luke. Did you want to say anything about autonomous vehicles, Leslie?
Look, we've been involved in a number of inquiries on autonomous vehicles, but most of these are about servicing and maintaining them. So look, it's something we've absolutely kept on the front foot, because they released a discussion paper not long ago saying that the independent aftermarket had no role to play. So and we've managed to got that clause out. So at the moment, I think regulators are simply focused on two things: maintaining and servicing, and cybersecurity. I don't think they're even thinking about accessories yet.
Yeah, you probably.
You're right. Okay, one from Gary Parker. How do you see the Road Vehicle Standards Act, which will be replacing the Motor Vehicle Standards Act, affecting the landscape in regard to CRNs and ADRs?
Well, that's a big question. In terms of the replacement of the Road Vehicle Standards Act, our major focus, of course, has been on second stage manufacturing, because without bogging the webinar down too much, the new act created two streams, and we felt that our stream was in the middle of both of those. So we're in the process of getting our stream back again to make sure that second stage manufacturing is, it maintains as a viable industry. I think the issue about ADRs in particular is that people felt that the new Road Vehicle Standards Act would mean less reliance on ADRs, particularly seeing more take up of international regulations. I don't think it's going to have as big an impact as was expected when we were changing over to the Act. That both benefits us and disadvantages us. We're always trying to pick up international standards that suit our industry. So where we are already complying with international standards, but as Stuart said, that gets pretty messy with things like bull bars. So I don't think we're going to see a revolution in ADRs in particular, and they always felt that it was going to be a second stage of the Road Vehicle Standards Act anyway.
No problems. This is James Filshy, which is a big question as well. Can you provide an overview of lifted vehicle regulations in terms of how far can a vehicle be lifted without requiring any certification? I think depends.
Yes, it depends on which state you're in. In the states where we've been successful, it's 50 plus 25.
That's for ESC equipped
vehicles. For ESC equipped vehicles.
Yep.
So, for example, that's the case in Queensland, in Victoria, in New South Wales. It's not the case in Western Australia. We are about to, nice AAA ad, we're about to do a regulatory hub that'll give you, James, a list of what you can do by state. But yeah, look, get in touch with me personally or with Nigel Bishop, and we'll give you a copy of that one.
Thanks, Leslie. There's also a reminder to highlight where members can get updates on advocacy via the website. That's the regulatory hub. So basically what we're trying to do is get all the publishable data from all the different states in one reference portal, so that you can, that's basically you go to for the links to all the latest regulations in different states. We'd love to get to the point where we've got that national harmony, but I think we've probably got more chance of securing world peace than doing that. So this is the next best option. Where do we check if customers want to make custom modifications on a vehicle? That's probably a similar sort of question.
The regulatory hub will give you all of the regulations that we're aware of. We'll put a copy of VSB 14 on that hub as well, because there are two issues here. One is what is considered to be a modification, hence VSB 14, and also what the actual reg is. But as Luke pointed out, it's not the case that everything you want to do to a vehicle actually has any regulation at all. So the regulatory hub is not far away. The other issue, of course, is how modifications interact with each other, which was our argument during the Queensland lift scenario. Is, you know, a customer comes and gets a 50mm lift and then gets the tyres put on elsewhere. No supplier made any error there. They both did legal modifications. It was the customer needs to know that those two together were outside of what is required without a certification. So look, the regulatory hub will provide some assistance in that regard.
I might combine the next two questions together. So Ben Watkins has asked the question, I believe, Queensland TMR are in the process of introducing a modification code for GCM and or brake tow capacity upgrades. What's the status or progress on that? And also someone else has asked, Jason Moody's asked the question about where things are at with regulations regarding GCM upgrades.
So we put together a technical working group that produced a document. So you're able to get a copy of that if you'd like. It's on our website, which provided information to regulators about under what conditions a GCM could be completed and what the test protocol might be. That was picked up by Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. So the three of those eastern seaboard states got together and said, let's have a look at this document, and TMR from Queensland said that they would take the lead. So it looks like it's a TMR, but TMR is not doing it as the Queensland government, they're doing it as the lead in a working party. Now, Nigel Bishop's been talking with them regularly, and the information that we have, there are no regulators on the call, so I'm going to do cone of silence here, is that they're actually a fair way down the path. In fact, we think they commissioned a little bit more testing on some of our testing. And they're looking at the GCM protocol that we produced with some more dynamic testing. So where we had advocated some dynamic and some computer simulation, it looks like they're going down the path of more dynamic testing. Now, the devil will be in the detail. Have they produced an outcome that would be way too onerous for us, or is it a good negotiation that we're about to have? I think we're very close. I know that those three states met about a fortnight ago. So we're keeping in constant contact with them, saying, are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for a chat? And as soon as we get something from you, we'll let you know.
No problems. From Matt Shilen, and sorry, Matt, I know you were trying to get it on the chat. Is the industry ready for more EV modifying, and are the regulators on the front foot in terms of changing regulations to suit the modifying of electric vehicles?
I think regulators are way behind on electric vehicle standards entirely. And we're only just got the Australian standards getting together on electric vehicles. Up until very recently, the only standard was for the workshop. So there is an electric vehicle standard, but it's all about how you lay out your workshop for service and repair. I think we're way behind on electric vehicles, and that's predominantly because it's a small proportion of the car park. And I don't think regulators are paying a great deal of attention. Frankly, they're so overloaded with GVM, GCM, power to weight. I think they're looking at a lot of, well, the majority of modifications that we're doing to four-wheel drives taking up their time. I don't think they're looking at EVs at all.
Did you want to add something there?
Yeah, from an ARC point of view, it's definitely on our radar to be looking more EVs and hybrids, and we have a number of requests to start looking into that space. We're by no means EV experts at the moment. We have some friends who are, and we'll be leveraging that collective capability to help the industry move forward. So in the coming future, we will have EV vehicles in here, and we're going to have to dive straight in pretty much. Majority of vehicles being modified obviously sit in a four-wheel drive space, so there aren't a lot of four-wheel drive hybrids out there that are kind of your typical pickups and NA class vehicles, but they're coming. We know they're coming, so that's something that we will definitely be diving into, and we'll make sure that we bring the industry with us on that journey.
Thanks, Luke. Next question. Leslie mentioned moving towards being on the front foot, and there's a great deal of industry concerned about DPF deleting. What should we, as the AAAA and the industry, be doing to ensure that we aren't all tarred with the same brush, as it's likely that the regulators will all of a sudden come out swinging on this one?
Look, I think it's a great question. It's also a question about any industry activity that we think is not sustainable, not safe, and not conducive to a good reputation. I think the stuff that we don't accept is what establishes us as a good industry. And we do need to be vocal about DPF deleting. It is an illegal practice. I know that some of it is prompted by the actual fault of the manufacturer of the vehicle and the design of the vehicle, but that doesn't justify our industry doing the wrong thing. So look, we've certainly been making representation to regulators and to governments about DPF. DPF in particular is a problem because it cuts across emissions and consumer rights and vehicle regs. So it ends up being no one's responsibility because it's spread between 3 ministers, and if everyone's watching the kids in the pool, no one is. But I think it's a good statement in the question about, as an industry, we need to be alert to activities that we think damage the reputation of our industry. Yeah, it's the standards that you walk past that define you, and what defines us is the stuff that we don't do. And I'm always saying to regulators, because anytime you sit down with them, they'll put up PowerPoint slides of vehicles that are unbelievably bad. You've sat through them, Stuart. Yep. You've seen them, Luke, in that power to weight presentation and the bull bar presentation. Yep. So they'll have a slide pack of 25 slides of modifications that, oh my God. And they'll put those up, and I say, you're not expecting me to justify these. These are illegal modifications. No one in our industry would agree with these. So we do need to be vocal about stuff that we think is not okay.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we are judged by the lowest common denominator in our industry, and there are cowboys out there, and you know, we need, as a legitimate industry, we really need to try and as much as we can stamp that out. But also, as an association, what we do is put the onus back on the regulators. I mean, they need to enforce their own rules, and they need to get those cars off the road. Someone asking, could you further explain your thoughts on IM240, especially for engine conversions on 4x4s? Victoria's recent changes are significantly affecting the local engine conversion industry. Leslie and Luke have both recently met with Vic Roads, so do you want to?
Yeah, look, Vic Roads are open. That question, the person who's posing this question, could you send us an email? We'd love to have a chat with you about how this is affecting you, because we're right in the middle of a conversation with them at the moment. We are clearly arguing against wholesale IM240 tests. They're not required, and we've just put a submission to the Victorian government where we analyse what every other state is doing, none of which have gone as far as Victoria. So, but they keep using words like, we are open to a dialogue, we're open to this conversation. But if you are the person who wrote this question, could you please send us an email, because we would love to have a chat, because we are interested in engine conversions for 4x4s, because so far we thought it might be a performance issue.
Well, yeah, it's a significant change. So it's either, performance issue based on applying force induction, or a significant change, aftermarket ECU, things like that, and engine conversion is the other one. And in principle, you know, no big issue with having some sort of compliance to say it is compliant, and it's not, it's within the limits. Is IM240 the right test? Well, that's still kind of on the side. The bigger issue here is that they're wanting to do it on every vehicle. So if you develop a kit to put an interesting engine into a boring pickup, then we're basically saying, look, we're happy to provide evidence to say that it's compliant on the first one, and then it's wash, rinse, repeat. What you don't need to keep doing that same test. You're going to be just wasting money and wasting everyone's time doing that. And we're just trying to get across that bridge to say, you have to trust us like you would trust an OEM or anybody else to say that the kit is the same as the last one that was done, or the component that was tested. That's the big issue we're trying to get across the line. I think we'll be.
We're optimistic.
Pretty well.
We're optimistic about this one. I mean, I know when we're in for a big fight versus when we're in for an adult conversation, and I'd say it's the latter. I'm really optimistic about this.
Excellent. And that person who wants to stay anonymous is said that they will be sending an email, which is great. We've probably just got time for one more question. This is an interesting one too. What do we see as the next area to come under significant scrutiny from the regulators?
I don't know. Luke, what do you reckon?
Power to weight?
Power to weight, yeah.
I felt personally attacked by that one.
Did you?
Yeah. But yeah, it sounds like, power to weight's a really difficult one, because we can't be treated differently to an OEM who would produce a high-powered vehicle either. So, and a lot of the proposals, it's really hard for them to make a rule to say that you can't, this is the number, when there's a whole number of vehicles you can buy that go over that number.
Yes. Yeah.
But it can cause a lot of heartache for us, I think.
Yeah, it can. And also, I think, given that's Western Australia starting to have that conversation with us, but Victoria indicated they were concerned as well. But again, given their terrible PowerPoint presentation, you can see, and it does help to step into their shoes sometimes. You can see some of the vehicles they were putting up were crazy, weren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, they were kind of, flip midair, I reckon, with the power.
Yeah.
So we've got to, at least, if we're going to get ahead of this, we've got to do both. We've got to get our argument ready, but also where's the line? And if they can't draw the line, I mean, one of the interesting things here, when I often say this to them, is if you want to draw upon aftermarket engineers, you're looking at them. Draw on our expertise instead of drawing on our advocacy skills.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, that's probably a good segue to wind things up. We want to keep things on time. So I think what we've seen tonight is a couple of things. I think one is the expertise that we have in our organisation, and then added to that the expertise that's out there in our industry. And I think, as I said earlier, that's a very powerful force. So I think our industry is in good hands in terms of the way we can go about it. So, and thank you, Luke and Leslie, for your presentations tonight and the way you've answered the questions. I think, I believe, and I hope all the attendees have got a lot out of the evening. Just in closing, I did also want to thank you all for coming online tonight. I know finding time in your busy work days, and we know that the industry is certainly bouncing back now. Restrictions on social distancing are being wound back a little, albeit in Victoria we seem to be going the other way, but the rest of the country seems to be fine. So things are bouncing back, and hopefully you're seeing that in your businesses. We're certainly hearing that anecdotally, and I know that we certainly don't take your support for granted. You, as our industry, have stuck by us through all these regulatory battles, and you're sticking by us now at a difficult time for everyone. And we're really stepping up the way that we deliver services and the sort of services that we're delivering. Obviously, we're now doing webinars instead of live events, and I think we will continue to do these on a regular basis, and maybe incorporate some live and interactive webinars so that we can reach people and have that interaction. So thank you for coming on tonight. Thank you for your ongoing support of the AAAA. And don't forget, we do have a lot of COVID-19 resources on our website. So if you go to www.aaa.com.au, there is a dedicated section in the members area for all our COVID-19 support collateral. So in closing, thanks again. We will have another webinar for you in a couple of weeks, and keep the chin up, and hopefully things are getting better out there, and we'll get back to some form of more normality at some stage very soon. Thank you very much. Thanks again to Leslie and Luke, and have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Night, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.